Blessed love and peace. Back at it, sharing a wee bit of ditty. The word ditty is way long before contemporary circumstances, so context, awareness, continuation. Share a thing. To be honest, actually, it's a very, very fascinating, very fascinating phenomena we observe at this moment of civilization, this era, this epoch. From a very anthropological but also theological perspective, because the field of anthropology is comparatively secular and doesn't shy away from the religious and spiritual realm as much as other fields of academia, quote unquote, science, sociology, even psychology, obviously history, otherwise. But it's like that different kind of. It's a very withdrawn type of discipline, academic discipline that is withdrawn from much of civilization. It has an increasingly, I won't say unbiased or objective, but further perspective and less biased than many other fields that are directly applicable to policies and conquest and everything else like that. I mean, anthropology still has that, but anyways, the one thing anthropology is still lacking from our observance is just the religiosity, a literacy, and not just an intellectual literacy, but a genuine practice, trotting, knowing what the revelation is, and by revelation beyond the book of the Bible, the revealing of the light, and then how the word relates. Right. Okay. So all that being said, very interesting, fascinating. We are exactly in the midst of this now. It's not necessarily pleasant when we're experiencing that, because we do that, but just recognizing like what's happening amidst all the atrocities, the corruption, the violence, the bullshit, the deception, the fear, like what is happening at this moment. It's actually very fascinating. So what are we talking about? This is what we're talking about. Blue jays, woodpeckers, sparrows, and maybe a cardinal or two. All right, nature. Oh, well, let's show what the scene is as the blue jay swoops in. Here we go. This is what we got going on. Do you see all that snow? It be snowing. That's where our terrace cafe is. The blue jay. Oh, it's a woodpecker right now. You don't see it because of the vantage. And if I do some kind of thing, up there is one, flew away. That was a blue jay, I think. Yep, that was the blue jay that did the flyby. But let's see. We go this way. It's a woodpecker. You can take my word for it. You don't trust me? Okay. How can we do? The woodpecker is not too shy, but if we move too much, then it's gonna fly. Oh, I'll do this left hand. Now it just looked at me. He's like, yo, what you doing? So you see a red tape there. Right behind the red tape, there's a red woodpecker. Very skilled in the art of posting. So all that being said, what we're observing in civilization at this moment is a fundamental transition of a primordial, is it primordial? Lightweight, maybe not the most deepest primordial, but like a primordial shift of leadership and beyond government, beyond religion, a primordial shift of leadership within the phenomena of humanity. So this is not unprecedented. This occurs previously, but this is the first time. Well, I can't say it. This is a very unique condition. So again, what are we talking about? All right, just recognizing history of civilizations, particularly within recent generations, recent centuries. There are basically two paradigms. There's the monarchy paradigm, particularly when there's an establishment. Chinese dynasties, India, the Rajas. We can look at European monarchies, particularly in the past millennia. Um, we can look at the methodologies of governance in the Mediterranean, which is not necessarily monarchies. The Caesar is not hereditary per se. Um, a lot of it is particularly well, a lot of it is determined through conflicts or whatever. However, um, there's a lineage, and then there is a court around the leadership that eventually vies for eventual ascendancy, and in the meanwhile bides its time in cooperating and fending off other rival villages, kingdoms, and empires or whatever else. So kings and queens. Uh, so that is a methodology of leadership. And it's not just the king per se, it is the court around the king and the methodology of, of authority within the surrounding court. Feudal system, how lands are divided, apportioned, governors, and the hierarchy within that. The order that is facilitated through these methodologies, the corruption, the violence, the rituals that are supported and that also guide. It's a mutuality. The rituals give guidance and stability towards the nobility, quote unquote, the monarchies, and the monarchies provide the materials to provide the offerings and provide people with food and the other materials for making the offerings and conducting the rituals. So that's one of the that's part of the nature of the monarchies. So amidst all this, there are eventual imbalances, injustices. People become less satisfied, further um, frustrated against the rule of the monarch, either within one generation or an eventual down the road generation. That's what we find within the United States. People, how do I put this? I'm getting a little bit caught up in the words because it's actually very simple, but I'm trying to frame it in an appropriate way. In an appropriate way. All right. Again, what are we talking about? The interesting phenomenon, the fascinating phenomenon. Maybe I hyped it up too much and then too much hype on it. So letting that settle somewhat just to focus on the essence. The point concerning the monarchs is that there is a historic precedent, a historic lineage of monarchic feudalism as a rule of law, as the paradigm of law, how society is governed. In many places around the world, in Europe, particularly the Middle East as well, within the Ummah, around the Arabian diaspora, amidst the Ottoman Empire and further within recent centuries, there is a coinciding paradigm of law leadership, which is religious. Very often, the two go hand in hand. Either the king is identified as the leader of the religious order, or the king is recognized by the religious order, and there's continuing cooperation. might be rivalries and competitions, but there is official cooperation between the two. Those are two of the predominant paradigms of governance, of leadership within world civilization. We could talk about tribalism and additionally, but particularly in the context of imperialism, those are two of the predominant paradigms of authoritarianism. So, what is observed within the United States is that there is a distancing, a divergence away from both of those methodologies. It is explicit within the establishment of the U.S. Constitution as an independent political construct away from the British Crown, the King of England, as well as the Church of England, officially, essentially, but not necessarily absolutely, because technically members of the Church of England can come to the United States and be members, citizens of the United States. So it's not necessarily a formal, official, absolute separation from the Church of England per se, but it is a formal separation from the King of England. Religions continue to exist within the United States from the beginning, particularly again Christian, particularly Protestant. But there's still, the religions abstain from ruling officially over society. Religions are essentially provided with a sanctuary, a refuge just to exist without governing others. So what the effect is, particularly in succeeding generations from over 230, 40 years ago, is that there's a culture that emerges, a culture of secularism. And that culture of secularism doesn't pledge allegiance to the King of England or any other monarchy and the lineage from that. And it doesn't necessarily pledge allegiance to any particular religiosity. And so it's kind of like free-floating. And a lot of this is a response to the authoritarianism, the atrocities, the oppression, the downpression, and people rebelling against that and being dissatisfied and wanting to live in a way away from those oppressions, the oppressions from the king as well as the oppressions from the church. That includes the Vatican Roman Catholic Church. It includes the Protestant Lutheran Extensions Church. So the point here is that in the United States, there becomes a practical realm, a lifestyle, a culture, a society of secularism. And authoritarianism of secularism. And it is intrinsically, essentially rebellious because it is responsive to the preceding atrocities. But at the same time, it abstains from having its own rooted old-time religion or old-time lineage or authority upon which to communicate authority. And so it's a youthful, rebellious type of authoritarianism. So it becomes a third paradigm. And again, rebelliousness is ancient, but to this day, or for over the past 200 years, that's what the United States is, a youthful, rebellious authoritarianism. Now, it's able to do that initially because it's on a way distant land. It's difficult for other, the parent kings and churches to like hold court, to keep things in order from this distant land that's massive. There's still indigenous people here, and to contend with that, not just the rebellious colonists, but also the indigenous people. It's a lot to manage, in addition to fending off each one's own empires from each other in the homeland. So the rebellious children, after generations, the rebellious children still are able to maintain a certain functionality and even prosperity, because the rebellious children, are able to utilize the technology and the methodologies of keeping order in order to commit genocide against the indigenous people here and reap the material benefits, particularly agricultural initially, at that time. So amassing riches, and through those riches, having increasing status or cash, not status so much, but leverage in negotiation with other nations, particularly homeland nations. All the nations on the Western Hemisphere are child rebellious societies. Um, Plain and simple facts, and that's derogatory. It's just what it is. And lacking the old time of legitimacy within its authority. And so, all right, here's where we get to it's not the kicker per se yet, but it's like it's what leads to the kicker. Wow, that's a lot to explain just to share what's happening at this moment. So, as the United States, particularly the United States, this is happening in other nations in the Western Hemisphere, but it is epitomized with the United States. As the generations are established from the U.S. Constitution, then again, there's all the agriculture is continuing, and that it's becoming productive, and there's expansion and acquiring further lands, killing further indigenous people, and conquering the lands and moving people out into those lands, and continuing to rape the land in order to get the material benefits from that. So that continues on, and the riches start to amass, and the people, the rebellious children, become increasingly wealthy, are able to build big houses, and also schools, universities, colleges, like what is observed and experienced in the homelands of Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and additionally, those being the primary populations initially migrating at that time. So schools are built, and in those schools, people learn what is best to be productive as a society. And a lot of the emphasis from that time within the secularism, there's still the studies of the classics, Greek and Roman, Greek and Latin, but there's an increasing emphasis on this new phenomena of science, and utilizing science and technology to gain increasing economic benefit, particularly because the United States is precluded from entrenching itself within the old time heritage of family lineage or religious lineage, because doing that involves continual subjectiveness, or not continual subjection to the homelands. So to be its own authority, the United States has to find another way of vying with other societies and gaining technology advances through weapons, through production of agriculture, through production of manufacturing, is a way of gaining leverage in trading and competing and warring against the homeland societies and as well as each other. So emphasis is in science and technology from 200 years ago, from over 200 years ago, and there are increasing results from that investment. Now, science and technology is being done in Europe at the same time, but it's at the same time in Europe still feuding with each other. All these different wars that are going on even during that time, culminating World War I, World War II particularly. And then in addition to that, the homelands of the Eastern Hemisphere have to continually stay within those old-time lineages of religion and monarchic families, and that slows things down. It's not the ability to do the research and have like a basically no fucks given about how things are done and consequences. And additionally, the U.S. is on a fast track because it doesn't give a fuck. It doesn't care about rules and propriety or consequences. It's just like, can we do this? And what can we get from doing it? That's basically what guides science in the United States. Whereas in the homelands, that is an influence. That is those two considerations are very influential, but it's also balanced amidst the other things of homeland, ancestral lineage, and relationship with nature. And additionally, and even if the science practitioners aren't caring too much about that, the science practitioners are in direct relationship with the old school kinfolk of those same places that do care about that. And there's always that necessity of balancing. So the United States has a competitive advantage in pursuing scientific discoveries. And that's what happens. All these inventions start happening. The cotton gin and what's it called? The Gatling gun, and all these other things, not necessarily in that order. And not everything, again, is discovered, quote unquote, in the United States, but a lot of the advantages, and additionally, particularly within the implementation, happen in the United States. So what happens is that science becomes particularly to this day, um, an emergent paradigm of authoritarianism because it is so influential. People flock to the technology because of the advantages, the very practical advantages that the technology provides. And so the technology can provide direct advantage in terms of military and just conquering other lands and establishing one's own self and maybe policing somewhat those lands. But then also the technology provides benefits in, again, productivity, agricultural production, as well as manufacturing. So the money influence becomes a thing. And the nature of the authoritarianism is significantly entrenched within and comparatively limited to that influence of money and or the influence of that military advantage, depending upon what the technology is. So, point is, science becomes an emergent paradigm of authoritarianism amidst the feudal, the monarchic feudal paradigm, as well as the religious paradigm. And again, science is without that rootedness of lineage and the stability that comes with that rootedness, because it's slow, it can be obtuse, but it's rooted and it's able to weather conditions effectively. All right, so that's the basic point at the moment immediately, is that science becomes an emergent paradigm of authoritarianism. And again, science is the nature of science. There's a rebelliousness within science, because science emerges, particularly science within the Western civilization. Science emerges significantly within the culture of secularism, and that secularism is a journey or an endeavoring, a fleeing away from the authoritarianism of the monarchic feudalism, as well as the religious authoritarianism. So secularism is intrinsically a rebelliousness, and the science that significantly emerges from secularism has an intrinsic rebelliousness as well. So those three strands within the context of imperialism vie with each other over the past couple of centuries as science becomes emergent, as monarchic feudalisms and religious authoritarianisms continue to vie with each other for control and power and influence and all that. Within the world wars, science becomes increasingly ascendant because it's a practical thing. Whoever is able to annihilate each other further efficiently, economically, effectively, takes lands, holds the lands. So science does that. Bombs, planes, tanks, mustard gas, and then nuclear weapons, atomic bomb. Science, 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 science. And so in the aftermath, as the Europe is in rubbles, dust, and rebuilding, that's when U.S. becomes a superpower, vying with Russia, but the history tells or offers that U.S. becomes the eventual superpower, particularly because it is unattached to the rootedness of other homeland societies. So with the United States becoming ascendant as a superpower, there's an equation, or there's an equating of science becoming a superpower amidst the religious authoritarianism and the monarchic feudalisms. So, here is the interesting thing about them, particularly within the context of imperialism. Amidst the religious authoritarianism and the monarchic feudalisms, there are the quote-unquote secret societies. We can call it Illuminati, we can call it this, that, and the other, whatever. There are those secret societies, and the secret societies are present within the United States as well, through the past centuries, few centuries. The nature of the secret societies is different than the nature of the religious authorities outright, and it's different than the natures of the monarchic feudalisms because it is not as transparent. It is increasingly manipulative. There's the obviously, well, I don't say obviously, but then there's the element of the satanic worship and otherwise. So the secret societies get infused intrinsically with religious authoritarianism and with the monarchic feudalisms. But it is very covert. It is very intelligent. It's like it's not even it's beyond intentionality, because again this is when we have to delve into the realm of the spiritual, of the beyond the earthly, because the way in which people attain the capacity to do this type of authoritarianism through the secret societies, the satanic worship, and additionally it's by tapping into a knowledge and a power and energy and influence that is other than earthly, that is beyond articulation. And there's an absence of outsmarting it, or even being able to definitively bound the sentience of that influence and of that energy and of that power. And that's one of the difficulties that anthropology has in evidencing it, that science has in evidencing it, because science is very averse towards things of that nature that are other than earthly, that are difficult to evidence, secret societies. So there's very often just the dismissal. Oh, that's crazy. Oh, that's superstition. Oh, that's that, and the other. So there's a limitation of science within now. But at the same time, secret societies infiltrate and infuse within science as an authoritarian construct as well, but in a different way. And so this is where we get into the interesting thing. So much of the people, the actual beings, the physical earthly beings that are facilitators of the secret societies and otherwise, historically have a considerable knowledge, intuitive and intrinsic knowledge, inherent knowledge, and a learned knowledge of civilization, of what is referred to as the humanities, and are able to draw upon the narratives of ancients to manifest manipulation and influence on people's behavior today, particularly amongst people who are ignorant, who are not knowledgeable about the stories of the ancients and what happened in the past generations, and what the challenges were, how people got past it, and additionally. And so people who do have that knowledge, and the discouragement of manipulating people with that knowledge, easier to do. And so that's much of what secret societies build from. The knowledge set within science is different. It's predicated upon mathematics, and it's a different mindset. It's a different vibration. It has its own susceptibilities of atrocities and otherwise, but different. So that is what we are observing at this moment. When people talk about the secret societies, Skull and Bones, the Rothschilds, whatever, influencing society, influencing the leadership, and additionally, um, it's relying upon sex, greed, corruption, and the base natures of people, psychology, um, histories, and with that, knowing people's psychology. If they're just like a if they're a blue collar worker, a worker um, that relies particularly in values, particularly physical strength, that person might be increasingly susceptible to sexual um, um, temptation and seduction. Or, I mean, every man is susceptible to that, but it's a matter of knowing how to do that. And it may be comparatively simple for a man who's of physical strength. It might just be a pretty woman, or otherwise, or a pretty woman who can dance or sing or otherwise. But to seduce a man who is a kashaitra, a king, who doesn't fall for the okey doke, who already has had sex with multiple women who are already pretty. It has to be there has to be something else. A woman who gets into his mind. The best way to a man's heart is through his stomach. To know how to care for a man, and that's in a committed relationship. But in terms of seduction, for men who are heady and strategizing, and additionally who have ambitions of conquest and other lands, and having yet to have been with a woman from another land, it's a matter of knowing that psychology and then knowing how to manipulate and corrupt him. And so the secret societies and other kinfolk have a certain knowledge about how to do that, particularly because of drawing from the ancient narratives. And sex is just one of those methodologies. There's other types of entrapments and otherwise. So science doesn't work that way too much. That's not the thing. Science is not a culture as much in those humanities experience. It's mathematics. Somewhat, I mean, logic to a certain extent, but further mathematics. And then kind of just like a primordial pleasure um, that is provided through the refuge of those mathematics. What I mean by that, it means being able to utilize mathematics to get a certain amount of temporal advantages, a technology, whatever, and make a lot of money, and then be away from everybody else because there's not a knowledge of how to deal with other people. There's a fear and otherwise of dealing with other people. So it's a matter of getting a lot of money and being able to satisfy the masses with that or whatever and get a distance. And then in that distance, it might be a campus, a corporate campus or whatever out in the cut. It might be just a headquarters, but however it is, getting that refuge, and in that refuge, then splurging, and then it might be sex, it might be visceral things like torture or murder or whatever else. But science works in a different way, and the methodologies of influence and manipulation within the scientific mind is different than within the feudalistic and within the religious authoritarian mind. So because of that, the secret societies to this point abstain from having, and I'll finish this statement, then I'll provide a further explanation of that. The secret society, so the secret societies seem to have less of a proficient knowledge about science and mathematics to be able to systemically manipulate, influence, and corrupt and control the scientific mindset. Now, I mentioned before that the secret societies works in the spiritual realm as well as in the earthly realm. So the spiritual realm, like I said, it's a sentience beyond calculation. So when people are immersed in that, people lose themselves and become just like instruments of the spirit world. But they're still earthly beings, and there's degrees of that. So some people are still proficient in an earthly sense and are earthly beings, but and the amount of control from the spiritual realm may vary. So the spiritual realm has significant knowledge about the mathematics, but in terms of utilizing earthly beings to be able to articulate knowledgeably and proficiently the knowledge of science, the mathematics, and otherwise, and then employ the intentions of the spiritual realm through the guise of the secret societies into the scientific realm, the scientific mindset, the scientific leadership. It takes further doing. Different from influencing religious authority and different from influencing um, monarchic feudalisms. So, um, that's what we are observing. So, in summary, and we're still getting to the point here. So, in summary, working summary at the moment, there is the historic paradigms of authoritarianism. We'll just call that leadership authoritarianism. There's the authoritarianism of religion. There's the authoritarianism of monarchic feudal systems. And then there's the emergent authoritarianism of science. And science, the authoritarianism of science, is distinct in certain ways from the preceding feudalisms. The preceding authoritarianisms, religion and feudalism. We'll just basically call monarchic rules just feudalism at this point. So science is different from feudalism and religiosity. And amidst all of that, the secret societies, the way in which the spirit realm, the malevolence or the seeming malevolence of the spirit realm influences feudalism and religiosity, is somewhat different in how it works within the science realm. Because it requires earthly beings who wield that influence, who manipulate, to have a knowledge about advanced mathematics and advanced science. So I'll get to the point here, and then any other additional considerations or whatever else, given availability of time and remembrance and concentration and otherwise, do that, God willing. So here we go. What we're getting to is this. So at this moment, what we observe is that the feudalisms were hit hard. Do I share all this to put context? All right. I'll just say it. And then, again, any other commentary or a thing we'll just put afterwards. This is what we're observing. The fusion of the religious authoritarianism and the feudalism with the science-based authoritarianism. And that is observed within the guise of the technocrats of the world system at this moment, particularly within the United States, located within the United States, because they're not the United States, but located within or affiliated with the United States. Who are we talking about? Oh, first, technocrats. Don't know if that's the most accurate or appropriate word to utilize, because it's an established term already, as much as we know, and it has a certain connotation to it. So it might be further accurate to describe, like, first to identify and acknowledge the existence of a technologyocracy, technologyocracy, basically the rule of technology. So rather than democracy, rather than a monarchy, it is the rule of technology. That's where things are at this point in the world system, particularly within the United States. It is the rule of technology, and it is so obvious. Rule of technology, technocracy. So within this technocracy, there's no election, there's no people voting for things, there's no people's rule. That's democracy, and it was never a democracy. It was an oligarchy at best, a plutocracy, meaning rule from a very distance by a small group of people. But even then, now, it's not even anywhere near that at this point. It is a technocracy. almost officially, and that's what we're talking about. We talk about, all right, well, before, so when we identify this phenomena of technocracy, then we identify, okay, who are the individuals, the beings, the earthly beings that might be seen as part of the leadership or the authoritarians of this technocracy. Again, it's the faces that are put in front of the audience. Um, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Bezos. We can talk about Jack Ma. We can talk about the kinfolk who own who own or run TikTok. But the basic, the usual suspects of the biggest technology corporations, particularly within the United States, around the world, um, those are what we can identify as the technocrats of the technocracy, the world technocracy. And we can see the nature of that rule because the way people communicate, it's not determined by governments, it is determined by technology organizations. The way people relate with each other, family members, organize, rely upon business, do business, economics, and additionally, the technology, the technocrats are beyond the banks at this point. The banks is for further in the realm of the humanities, even with all the complex finances, and additionally, it's still based within the humanities and the feudal systems and religious authoritarianism. The technocrats are separate from that, and it's a culture of secularism. It has this pretense of democracy because that's just the history, and that's been the relationship between science and the United States that enables science to become so ascendant. However, it is very secular. So, part of the challenge with that is even just knowing what the rules are. Because again, like I said, the basic rules, as it is shown, is that what can we do and what do we benefit from doing that? That's pretty much it. Whether we're talking about pharmaceuticals, whether we're talking about weaponry, whether we're talking about agriculture and biological bioengineering or otherwise. Um, Again, it's mass production of clothing, plastics, and otherwise. Can we do it? What can we get from doing it? That's pretty much the rules. And then the methods of motivation for people to get on board is money, make money. Uh, so that's what we observe. The technocrats and evident. I mean, seeing things like can't even determine what is actually happening in the world without relying upon the technocrats. So to even evidence like what's going on or to say one thing or another, can't even say without relying upon the technocrats. So when we talk about press conferences or whatever at the Oval Office, even then it's increasingly blatant that the old guard of the United States is out, and officially the technocrats are in the forefront. Officially, uh, the government does not control uh, the the methods of communication. Uh, Governments might have direct connection with police at the local level, military perhaps, can't say for certain without the technocrats. But even then, the whole economy and the micro feudal arrangement of municipalities, those who are governing the economy, the municipalities who are hiring the police, who are hiring um, the staff and the leadership of the city governments, local governments, county, state, um, that's in the hands of both the religious authoritarianism, the ongoing feudalism of the United States, and increasingly technocrats. So um, that's what's observed. That's what's interesting to observe. Is this transition, this transformation? Um, One of the challenges is that the technocrats, technocracy again abstains from is unable to rule people. It's not able to rule people because it does not have the discipline or the knowledge to rule people. It doesn't have even the love to rule people in and of itself. To have the love of people means to acknowledge people's creation, from origin, lineage, language, rituals, and additionally, that's what's necessary to genuinely love people and to know people, to know what makes people move, and additionally requires that knowledge. And then the discipline of behavior, of knowing what the harmony is, and being in at peace and cooperation and in relationship with others. The knowledge, discipline, and love of others. Science is without that. The technocracy is without that. And so the technocracy may be able to motivate people through money, and guide people in being productive contributors to whatever vehicles of innovation and production that the technocracy agencies wield. However, in the intermediate and long term, and in and of itself, the technocracies are unable. I have to be careful how I phrase this. The technocracies, in and of themselves, are without the capacity to govern people, particularly large, massive numbers of people, like 350 million, so called, within the United States. And so it relies upon other methods of authoritarianism, religious and feudal, to do that. So what is interesting also is, again, the fusion and how secret societies immerse within the realm of science. As science returns or approaches closer to mainstream society, in order to be able to govern or endeavor to govern mainstream society, that requires science becoming increasingly involved within the humanities. And as science becomes the leadership, becomes increasingly involved in the humanities, the leadership becomes increasingly involved and susceptible and availed to the secret societies. And when the science technocrats and authoritarians become increasingly availed to the humanities and the influence of the secret societies, way unequipped to deal with that. So it might just be a little bit of a dip if it's knowledgeable, only a little bit of a dip, because it knows it does not have the hardly any capacity to resist the secret society influence, because it requires rootedness, a knowledge of where one comes from, relationship, ancestry, rituals. So that's what we're observing at this moment. It's that as the increasing presentation and transparency of the technocracy, through the revealing of the technocrats as official authoritarians of the decaying democratic pretenses of the United States and the world democracy system. And the world shift, the world adjustment accordingly, because that's only part of it. This is only part of the puzzle. This is only part of the experience. I mentioned before Jack Ma. There's an interesting conversation between Jack Ma and Elon Musk a few years ago, and both are sitting on a stage in front of audience and sharing some different opinions, views, perspectives, experiences about life, purpose, and productivity. And this shows increasingly the worldview, the variance within the worldview beyond just Western civilization and science, and the balancing accordingly that is increasingly natural and tribal, and also peaceful. So um, all of that factors into the authoritarianism, and there's an evolution. There's a continual evolution of the authoritarianism, because religious authoritarianism evolves, the feudal authoritarianism evolves, and additional paradigms of authoritarianisms emerge. We can talk about mixed heritage, and additionally, and it's not all for the good. There's good and bad. There's good and challenging within it. So, um, basically, the thing that's interesting at this moment in a theological, anthropological context and perspective is observing the face of imperialism literally changing. Elon Musk is not that face. He is a face at this moment. And all the names that I mentioned are not the face of imperialism um, in the next generation and further. These are initial or the immediate steps towards another uh, civilizational era and paradigm and experience and epoch. And so these are initial steps in that transition. So um, a lot of it, and the thing is, like, the secret societies are not all evil. The secret societies provide a purpose. The secret societies have a knowledge, because ultimately it's just spiritual realm manifesting. It's all the will of God. It's all the will of the Most High at work. And the only people that we have to blame is our own selves. The only fingers that we have to point towards is our own selves. The only ones we have to point fingers at is our own selves, put that way. So we don't condone the violence, the atrocities, the corruption, but at the same time recognize this tremendous knowledge that is held amongst the secret societies, the tremendous knowledge about people's behavior and psychology, the own corruptions within people's own selves that has little to do with the secret societies at all, and how secret societies simply manipulate that corruption. People's own selfishness. That's what we observe within the internet, and it's like what we observe is like grassroots exploitation, like people self-exploiting, and all, like back in the day when we watched television. We're talking about generation home computer and satellite here. We watched television, and when I was growing up as a child, we used to sing the songs of the commercials when we liked the songs. Then we learned better. We're like, yo, this all garbage. Stop looking at the commercials. Then we said, stop looking at the television. Didn't have a choice of what we could see or otherwise. So we turned the whole thing off. In law school, didn't watch TV at all. Not even the news, nothing. Because it was like the law school is creating the news. What you got to look at it for. I say law school. Law is, and law school is involved within that. The people who are making the news are going to law school and talking about it. So, anyways, we didn't watch TV. What is the point to this? And we got to wrap this up too, because it's a day and we got to go. Got things to do. Oh, it's so important. All right, yeah, all right. So with the commercials, it was a very that we perceived during those days media as authoritarianism. Oh, the media, the big media, um, and oh, it controls the message and it controls what people see. Even with cable television, oh, there's so much barriers to entry, and we're not getting stories that are self-affirming. And additionally, and there's legitimacy with those things, within those articulations. However, we have a choice. We had a choice at that time. We have a choice now about what we do. We recognize the commercials as being exploitational and negative, unhealthy, and we would blame corporations for that. Big corporations for just peddling these messages that make just people stupid and ignorant, and just like infuse temptation and desire in people. And additionally, and send all these bad messages. We would blame corporations, big bad corporations, for doing that, and government maybe for allowing it to happen or doing it itself. Now what we see in the internet is the small time people jumping to do the same thing, like the Hollywood shuffle. One person refuses to do the corruption, and then the other actor is quick to jump in their place after agreeing with the movement and the cause and the activism. Then when that person gets an invite, oh yo, blah 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 blah, and hops to it. So what we see on the internet at this point, it's established now. It's particularly when social media gets monetized and YouTube starts paying out and people get paid for their things or whatever. That's what we see. It's not corporations doing it. It's grassroots, homegrown people, quick to exploit others and exploit themselves. And I can't blame corporations for that. People are doing it. It's grassroots, homegrown entrepreneurial exploitation and self-exploitation. And it's painful to see that. And it's difficult for my generation, particularly because we get involved in the internet at a later stage in life, and we make decisions because it's a way of connecting with the world. And additionally, in those initial days when there was no monetization, there's an increasing authenticity in terms of communication, and so now there's a conditioned behavior. We've learned to interact with the world through the internet. Ain't blaming nobody but ourselves, just understanding what the conditions are. And now, since things have changed so significantly, it's difficult to find a way to do what we used to do in terms of interacting with each other as a world collective, as a world society, without having to navigate through these very unhealthy, poisonous, polluted waters of the internet, particularly social media. And what we also observe is that it has reverted to its old self, the internet, because we can still pinpoint our communication with kinfolk who are knowledgeable, but then there can be difficulties with that. Otherwise, if we go to social media, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Reels, or whatever, we revert back to the whole 3 channels again, and little choice about what we see, but a huge perception of choice. But it's the same old thing of flicking through the channels. Doing the doom scrolling is flicking the channels. It's the same thing. We've reverted back to the same thing, and ain't nobody to blame but ourselves. So ain't nobody to empower us but ourselves too. So ain't nothing to it but to do it. So it's a matter of building in that respect. Acknowledging it and building accordingly. What we also, so when we talk about the secret societies not being all evil, and the ascension of the technocracy and the fusion between the secret societies and the technocracies, what we also observe is the things that are being presented in terms of Elon Musk being in the Oval Office, standing over the president, and whatever accusations of Elon Musk's son saying to the president or whatever, Trump. That's somewhat ancillary. However, these are introducing these actualities to the American public, to the American audience, of getting used to the idea of there being an authoritarianism higher than the president, and psychologically preparing for that actuality, for that official, formal actuality. And the whole thing about Gulf of this and Greenland that, Canada this, Mexico that, tariffs this, and additionally, these are agitations that are just so ridiculous, but at the same time, it's provocative. It's poking at the sovereignty, being extremely disrespectful towards other nations, and gives other nations a very strong reason to respond. And there's the expectation, and again, there's actually benefit in this, and it's better than a lot of the alternatives of how this power transformation occurs, but it gives other nations a very strong reason to respond and actually counter the United States, and not just a strong reason in the mindsets of other nations, but a strong reason in Americans' own mindsets, because the Americans know that this is wrong. Know it, plain and simple. The hardcore conservative um, um, hometown folk know it's wrong, and might not say it, and might even like tout it and shout it because feeling better and better ego with that, but no, it's wrong. So that when nations come back with just a little bit of balance, it's so much so that yeah, we deserve that. When somebody's popping off and on, there was a time when I was with my fraternity brethren outside a club, and people that somebody got in a fight, somebody did that. I was drunk. No pro. This is not a powerful thing, but in that time, I was doing something that was very uncharacteristic of myself, but very characteristic when I was drunk during that time, young, which is popping off at the mouth. Blah blah blah. What's up? Blah 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 blah. And when I was doing that, somebody went plot out, smacked me right in the face. And to be honest, the dude looked like Method Man. I was drunk and I was shocked. And the dude didn't. I don't think the dude said anything. He might have looked, and there was a lot of crowd. There's a lot of people. He might have reached over somebody, whatever else. But um, I just stopped yapping my mouth and everything. Um, I wasn't even mad because I knew, yo, I'm being ignorant, and that was the only occasion of getting into altercations or whatever. But that was a very distinct moment of like, yeah, I deserve that. That was stupid. And it's not acquiescing to any dude or whatever else like that. It's just like recognizing, yeah, shut the fuck up. So that's where America is at this moment, doing what it's doing, and eventually, boom, smack in the face. Yeah, we deserve that. It's not a slug. It's not a hit. It's not a hit across the jaw. It's not shots fired. It's not death. It's a smack in the face to sober up and be like, yeah, no, we deserve that. Now, it just so happens to be that what can be expected, that smack in the face being the dismantling of the U.S. Constitution and the government as it is perceived at this moment. And it might be the establishment of independent provinces, the states at this moment. Those states might um, uh, adjust in terms of the actual geography and boundaries, but that process happening in a way that is increasingly tolerable by the American public, particularly when the American public knows that it's going all out of pocket with what is being communicated at this moment. And as I communicated before the election results a year ago or so, that this is actually perhaps a favorable scenario than another scenario if a sister had been elected as president and there being an uproar and tumult, like tremendous tumultuousness from the interior. So, anyways, again, we pray for the well-being of all people. We work for the well-being of all people, for all life. And we're articulating our understanding, our observance of conditions and actualities at this moment. Rare sighting of the pigeons right now. That's cool. Meanwhile, these devices are increasingly infused within people's fabric, and that's something that's of tremendous concern. Uh, and there is a priority in cultivating a culture that is respectful of and in relationship with nature, that values and prioritizes nature. Amidst continuing technology advances, prioritizes nature and recognizes nature as the primary earthly provider of health and well-being. That's somewhat of a further adjustment, and that involves adjustments within standard methodologies of the pharmaceuticals and otherwise, the hospitality, the health industry. That's another conversation. What else we got to say here? Maybe a snow day. Anyway, what we got to say. Ah, okay, I'll share this. I'll give it somewhat of a vision of like some solutions again, focusing on the positive. One, again, is just the basic guidance of being increasingly close with, being increasingly knowledgeable, mindful, respectful, and at peace with nature, the trees, the water, the soil, the earth, the air, the atmosphere, the weather, the soleil light, within our own respective um, preferences and natures. We all have different natures, and each one is legitimate. Hot, cold, wet, dry, high, low, whatever, wherever we find our balance in. To look at the, and wherever we find ourselves at this moment, if this is where we perceive ourselves as like settling, or at least being for the next period, whatever, looking at the natural trees, the indigenous trees, looking at the indigenous plants, looking at the water, where the nearest natural water flows, looking at the animals, the insects, all the natural indigenous animals, and just being aware of what it is and learn the names. I got a lot of names to learn, names to learn, and names to learn. Um, but just being mindful of this and being further respectful and like appreciative, grateful. And in that gratitude, there's an intrinsic yearning for well-being, for the well-being of the life, the natural life around us, and the well-being within ourselves, knowing what provides us that well-being, the nutrients, the nourishment that provides us that well-being, the behavior that provides us that well-being. So that's an essential thing. We can talk about knowledge of God, relationship with God, relationship with Creator, or whatever we recognize as higher purpose, higher guidance. That is perhaps before the first thing. But then continuing on, like in a geopolitical thing, what we can, what we observe or what we see, what we consider at this moment is again the natural balancing of boundaries, the natural balancing of boundaries being drawn by how the water flows, and then the policies um, naturally acclimating to the environment as well, just very naturally. The higher altitudes, there being greater emphasis of um, environmental protections, because whatever happens at the higher altitude trickles down into the lower altitude. So if pollutions and poisons are being cultivated and transported at higher altitudes, it trickles down to the lower altitudes. So for those who value and prioritize organic, healthy environment, it is most prudent to secure that, to protect that at the higher altitudes. And then people can migrate accordingly. Cities, families migrate accordingly. And then at the lower altitudes, there may be further liberties in terms of industry and pollutions or whatever else, amidst the perceived necessities for such. Um, that's around the world, categorically. Then what we also observe is then again the political constructs known as nations that only existed within the past 200 years or so, um, evolving to be much smaller, not 350 million. But one of the social media shorts that I view recently talks about within the Muslim community for centuries, it wasn't a nation per se. There weren't nations. It was cities, and kinfolk travel from city to city, and there are institutions and schools. People would study and migrate from one place to another accordingly, trade and otherwise. And so that is a consideration of the evolution and essentially the return of world civilization from this moment and this current paradigm and perception of nations. Nations of 300 million are ungovernable. facts. Even 20 and 30 million is a huge number to govern effectively and proficiently. And so it's a matter of um, concentrating our political intentionalities within our local experience, house, village, metropolis, and then province and further. Uh, and the sovereignty, self determination, and self governance being invested at that local level, house, village, metropolis. And then the agreements between metropolises, between provinces, uh, focusing on those mutual interests that are in accordance with the policies of the natural harmony and well-being of the natural life around us. So a lot of what I'm saying is actually coherent. It may not necessarily be the most like direct and simplest ways of articulating it, but it's generally there. Uh, so I say, uh, humbly, with all things in praise, the Most High, Elohim, known by different names and beyond all names. So that's further guidance in terms of the evolution and path of world civilization. And we've articulated before here on this land, returning sovereignty categorically to indigenous kinfolk. It may be further concentrated and immediate within certain areas compared to other areas. And then establishing the metropolises and provinces accordingly amidst that sovereignty. There being provinces that are particularly culturally specific, religious specific, metropolises and villages that are cultural specific and religiously specific, and migration that happens immediately and organically eventually along these lines. That's here in the Western Hemisphere. But even in the Eastern Hemisphere, the homeland, similarly, even within China, even within India, a dismantling of the Indian nation government, the Chinese national government, because again, 1 billion people is ungovernable. Particularly, well, I'm not gonna get into too much presumptions about Chinese civilization, but when we look at even the different ethnic groups, the different pronunciations of language, and additionally, cultivating and brokering an agreement amongst the different groups within the civilization of China to be able to effectively coexist. There's always going to be rivalries, there's always going to be competitions and conflicts and conquests, yet arriving at an evolved paradigm of mutual respect and coexistence amongst the different factions within China and as well as within India. Easier said than done, and we know what happens historically between when trying to do that with the establishment of India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. However, there's also an awareness of civilization is different at this point, and there's still the susceptibility of violence, but there's also an awareness of like the palpable awareness of immediate obliteration at a given moment. And so that provides some type of pause. And I'll say that, I guess this is where we'll wrap this up, because yeah, it's time to roll. I've been trying to peep if the transportation is running right now, but because I don't say it's not necessarily a blizzard necessarily, but it's a gentle snowstorm. We can call it a gentle snowstorm. We are getting a fair amount of snow at the moment. Recognizing that the vast number of people are predators. I mean, humanity is predatory. intrinsically. That's just the nature of it. And at the same time, humanity is angelic, is heavenly. People are children of God, and people are continually wrestling with these two different natures of being predatory, not wanting to be prey, but also wanting to be transcendent. It's a tenacious journey that we all are on, and we each find our different stages and platforms of settling and just compromise. So that being said, the vast amount of civilization is predatory. And the challenge with that human predatoriness is experiencing is how easily it is for human predatoriness to annihilate itself. The nuclear age is a very stark awakening to that. But now we experience that in the very micro annihilation of digital communication and artificial intelligence and all this other type of stuff. The erosion of the social fabric of family and friends and society. So the basic teaching and guidance for today is the same teaching and guidance from thousands of years ago, which is piety. Piety is letting go of the predatoriness, embracing the higher teachings of the spirit realm of altruism and peace, reconciliation, and learning how to navigate amidst the ongoing predatoriness of humanity without being able to tell in one face or another at one moment or another who is predatory and who is otherwise. That is the path of piety. But the path of piety is not predatory as much as anything can be. Zebras eating grass at a zoo can be argued as being predatory by partaking of the infrastructure and services that the imperialist zoo provides. So anybody can argue one way or the other on these things. However, generally speaking, with genuine heart, piety is a path outside of predatoriness and is very vulnerable as well. Yet that is what we encourage, that is what we see kinfolk migrating to. Maybe not all kinfolk, maybe not even 10% or 1% of kinfolk, but an increasing number. And that increasing number having ongoing continuous relationship with the conventional hierarchy of society, the authoritarianisms of global civilization, of world civilization. Such that the authoritarians, the hierarchies of global civilization, maintaining an awareness of the necessity of the guidance and the insight of piety in order to effectively maintain effective governance of whatever constructs continue. And so amidst all these migrations around the world and these settlings and dilutions of nations into for smaller, manageable, administratable entities and collectives, piety being an increasingly present and ongoing influence and relationship with the hierarchies and authoritarians of these ongoing methods of governance. And again, it fits within the historic context of the Varna system, the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. Mixed heritage ascending within this, being recognized within this as mixed heritage, is the second largest ethnic group of the world, second to the indigenous ethnic category. And thus there being increasing formality within the experience of mixed heritage, meaning rituals, culture, rules, laws, ethics, organizations, communities of many different kind, from the orthodox to very assimilationist within mainstream cultures, respectively, east, west, north, and south, and middle. And then, but recognition and relationship, because that's something that's comparatively new as a global construct, is homogenous tribes acknowledging mixed heritage tribes, and making peace and compacts and treaties and trade negotiation and cooperation with mixed heritage kinfolk, with mixed heritage tribes and entities. So anyways, we're going to wrap it up at that. The woodpecker is right here saying what's popping. Drum, song, music keeps the dance going. Stories guide us. Food builds us. Healthy, healthy, healthy. Discipline makes things easier. Organize your life. That's a song near the key of life, amidst the key of life, with big ups to Stevie Wonder and the Dead Prez. That being said, we give all thanks and praise to the Most High Elohim, and blessed love and peace in Rastafari.